Hi everyone, in this tutorial we're going to go over cast shadows and drop shadows. Alright, let's get started. Okay, so now that we have this nice 3D pool ball with its highlight and its shadow, it just looks like it's floating there. We need to add a cast shadow here so it looks like it's connected to the ground. So again, you want to think of your light source, where it's hitting, and then where our cast shadow is going to be. So if our light is coming down from the side, hitting here, we're going to get the shadow on the object here, which is our form shadow, and then we're going to get this shadow here. To make a cast shadow for a sphere, it's pretty easy. We're just going to have to make a sphere and then skew it and put it into position. So for that, I'm just going to copy the one that we already have, copy and paste, and then we're just going to want to change the color. Now you can either change the color to black and lower the opacity, or we can change it to a darker green, like for the ground here. Whatever color the ground is, the shadow will just be a darker color of that. So what we're going to do is grab our eyedropper, make sure our object is selected, and we'll just select the green from the ground here, and then I'll darken it up a little bit. So that's going to give us our shadow. So now we want to make sure it's underneath the ball. So I'm going to grab it and drop it below our pool ball. And then you're just going to kind of want to move it into place for now. Okay, so we're going to need to stretch it out. The shadow is going to stretch out along here. We'll also be using the skew tool to adjust the shape of it. So let's just start by stretching it out a little bit. And it's going to take a little bit of experimenting to get a shape that you like. And then we'll just lower that a bit. We're already almost getting the shape we need. With a sphere, it's pretty easy. What we can do to change the shape of our shadow now is use the shear tool. We covered the shear tool in one of the week 4 tutorials. So if we click our object and then come over to our shear tool, it's found underneath the scale tool. So click and hold, grab your shear tool, and then you can click and move, and it's just going to adjust the shape and the perspective of it. So you want to just move it around till you get it in a spot you like. You can also adjust the anchor point. So if you want to keep it pinned at the bottom here underneath the ball, you can just click there and then drag it from there. So let's just stretch it out a little bit, get a shape we like. And then you'll also have to probably use a variety of just scaling and rotating to get the shape you like. So we can rotate it where we want. We can move it down into place. It's a little long, so I'm just going to scale it in. Okay, so that's starting to look pretty good. We can move it over a little bit. We can just nudge it with our keys even. Maybe go with something like that. And I'm just going to bring it down a little bit there. Okay, so now it looks like it's actually sitting on the ground, like it's making contact with it. But I think our edges are a little too hard. So what you want to do with that, like in our previous tutorial, is put a blur on it. So I'm going to select it, come up to Effect, Blur, and select the Gaussian blur. That's going to bring up this option here. We can hit Preview to see it, and we can see it start to blur already. So let's just blur it a bit to where it looks good, and again we can adjust this later too, and we'll hit OK. That might be a little too blurry, so we could adjust that by bringing up our Appearance panel. Click Window, go to Appearance, and that's going to bring up this one. So then we want to click on our object, we'll click on the shadow, and it's going to give us our properties. So we have the opacity here and the blur here. So if you click the blur, it'll bring this up, and we can lower that a bit. We'll hit Preview, and maybe go with something like that. And you can also lower the opacity here if you want. Okay, next I'll show you how to do shadows for something a little more complex than just a sphere. So for my project here, I think I'll need shadows on my house coming down this way. So that's going to be a little more difficult than just the sphere. I'm going to start by just hiding everything I don't want to work with now. I'll keep my hill because I want my shadow to cast on that. We're going to hide the bats, and we'll hide the scarecrow, and also my text. Okay, so we're going to want to create a shadow for the house. So what I'm going to do is copy the house, I'll combine it all as one piece, and then change the color of that. So we'll come over to the house layer, I'll expand that. I have a sublayer with the house main. So I'm going to grab that and drag it to the layer panel. You'll see that little plus sign beside it, and then I hit that, and it's going to duplicate it. So now since it's layered over top of it, to grab the entire thing, I'm just going to select the group by hitting this icon here. And that selects everything. And you can just move it over. Okay, so now we have two houses. I'm going to want to combine one of them to make the shadow. So I'll select it again, and to combine it, I'm going to use my Pathfinder tool. So let's go up to Window and Pathfinder. Okay, so with it all selected, we're going to hit Unite, and that's going to unite it as one object. And it automatically changed the color to black, which is perfect for us. Okay, so we're going to use this as our shadow. So that turned it into this path here. We'll just rename that as House Shadow. Okay, so we're going to have to use a combination of scaling, rotating, and skewing to get it into the position and the shape we want. So first we're going to drop it underneath, because right now it's over top. We'll drop that whole layer underneath. Okay, so let's start by just rotating it to get a basic direction we want. So we want it to come this way. The moon is behind. It's going to cast the shadow this way. Maybe something like that. Alright, now let's use the shear tool to get a shape that we like. Come over to the shear tool, and we want to pin it down here underneath the house. So I'll pin it, and then just start to skew it. Okay, so you can kind of get the idea of where it's going to go and the shape you want. I think maybe something like that looks good for a nice long shadow. And then we can just move it into the place we want. I think I'll make it a little bigger. And you can just kind of move it around and adjust it how you want it. Okay, so let's blur this a little bit. We'll go to Effect, Blur, select our blur. We'll hit Preview, and maybe just a little blur on it. Hit OK. Okay, and that's giving us a blur we like. Now let's just adjust the opacity a bit. Maybe drop it down to something like that. Now in this example here, we made our cast shadow green to match the color of the background and then just darkened it a bit. In this one, it just created it black, which works because when we drop the opacity, we're going to see the colors come through underneath. Alright, so that's looking cool for our shadow, and I think maybe we can add some to the trees as well. So I'll show the trees. This one, the shadow would be coming off screen, so we won't really see it, but I think we'd be able to see some of this one. So I'll just expand my tree layer and find which tree that is. That's that one there, so I want to select that layer and drag it down to the new layer and drop it there to make a duplicate. Now I have a duplicate of it, I can move it over, and again we're going to just unite it to make one solid shape, and that's going to create one shape out of that, and then we can kind of rotate it and get it to a place we like. Maybe something like that. And then again, we'll use our shear tool just to get a different shape to it. We'll click on that. We're going to put the anchor point here, and then let's just kind of drag it out to make a shape. I'm just going to pan my board down so I can see more. Maybe do something like that. And this is just showing through the mask here. Okay, so that will also blur. Add our blur to it. And also lower the opacity. So our appearance panels here, we have it selected. We'll go opacity and just drop that down a bit. Alright, I think that looks pretty cool like that. We can just move it so it's more underneath our tree. Yeah, something like that. Okay, next we're going to go over drop shadows. So drop shadows I don't recommend using too often since it's not the same as a cast shadow. It's more for like something that's put up on a wall, a frame or something, and it just gets that little shadow right underneath it. So for example, I'll just make a rectangle here. And so say we have this hanging on our wall and we want to give it a little drop shadow. So we'll click on it, we'll go up to Effect, and then we're going to go down to Stylize, and then select Drop Shadow. And then again we can hit Preview. So what that's going to do is give us that shadow right there. We have our options in here, but if we hit OK, we'll be able to adjust them in our appearance panel. So if you click the drop shadow in there, it's going to bring up these options. So you could adjust the opacity here. We'll hit Preview so we can see. And the offset here offsets the shadow into a certain direction. So you can adjust it that way. You can lower it or raise it. And you can adjust the blur on it. So those I only recommend if you have something, say, like on a wall or a plate on a table, something that has to have a contact shadow really close to it, something like that. Another way to do it if you want to get it even closer, because that's the closest you can get it with the options here, is just to create a second object underneath it and make a shadow, kind of like how we did with this. So we're going to delete our drop shadow selected in the appearance panel, but we have to make sure we have our object selected and just hit delete. Okay, so another quick way to do that is just copy paste it, put it over top, and then we'll take this one underneath and just change the color up. And then you can add a blur to that. So it's essentially doing the same thing. This just gives you a little more control because you can move it exactly where you want. So you can nudge it around and do something like that. So that's how you do drop shadows. I would recommend, like I said, using it for things on the wall, maybe things on a table, or even use it for your text. So I'm going to adjust my text here. So right now I just have it flat, but if I want to just make it pop out a little bit, I can add a shadow to it. So I'll select my title here, go to Effect, Stylize, Drop Shadow, and hit Preview. And then I just get my shadow in there. And I can bring it in a little bit, bring the blur down a bit, and just adjust it to where you like it. And that just pops it off from the background a little bit. Alright, that's going to cover this tutorial on cast shadows and drop shadows.